We call the meeting to order at 8:05 a.m. Couple things to go through. Business, first one, the FY25 budget. So I want to provide everybody an update on the select board presentation and vote from last night for those who didn't stay up, prime time viewing. So we took the vote from the school committee from last Wednesday in terms of $1 million request to take that funding and move it into the town reserve account. Based upon discussions with the town administrator, that process was going to be the best kind of process for providing flexibility to access the funding within FY25 whenever that number is finalized. So brought that request to select board. The select board ultimately voted in favor of moving $700,000, not the full $1 million, out of the special ed reserve account and into the town reserve account, meaning that $700,000 would be available for access to request an appropriation. If it obviously needs that vote would need approval by town meeting, and then in order to access the reserve account, that requires approval of the warrant committee. It wants to oversee that any withdrawals from that account. But so they, again, did 700,000, not the full $1 million. Obviously, you know, our current deficit is projected to be just under 700,000, but we asked for the full $1 million to just provide the town flexibility, because we thought that made more sense to say, hey, let's be conservative here and do it all in one go. The select board's decision, my take on it at least, was to do as little as possible. That does mean that the $300,000 additional is staying in the special ed reserve account. So at this point, special ed reserve account next year will have $300,000, which obviously is positive for the schools. If we don't need to tap into that funding, which I think we all agree is the goal, then we do not need that funding. Anything else from that presentation?
Thank you. Thank you. I thought the presentation good and clear in terms of, so we can talk about that also today, because I'm interested in the feedback for how we can help the warrant committee also understand kind of like how we got where we are and what's been done. I think it was a good discussion about the consultant. So the best practices that we've been putting in place together with the town, and those were the ideas about a joint committee and consultant to inform that additional best practices. So
yeah,
I think that was positive for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Not something we discussed as full group. So to update you all on that, there's kind of two things that within conversations with members of the select board and the town administrator kind of came up as kind of joint ideas. So I'll say one of them's joint idea, the other was kind of predicated by the town administrator, but it's a good idea. The first is this like best practices consultant. So the idea of hiring somebody, current estimates are maybe it would be around $50,000, but that's what the town administrator will need to do to kind of figure out, but hire somebody to look at both the town and the school, HR, finances, budgeting practices to provide additional recommendations beyond the best practices that Katie is helping us start to implement, and we're excited about that. But are there other ways in which we can improve this? Are there other places where, as a town or a school department, we need to look at targeted investments to improve systems such as our financial software, payroll software as a town, things like that. So that is something that the town administrator was supportive of. Initial conversation with Katie. Katie was supportive of. Can appreciate John for helping kind of organize that conversation about that. So that was one that seemed to have some support. Within that conversation, there wasn't a whole lot of internal discussion at the select board level around that. I don't know if there was later on. I didn't watch the full meeting, but believe there will be support for that. I think the town administrator just needs to get some more information on what the scope would be and what the projected costs and where they would cover that cost.
He also, it's worth noting, Nick, Roxanne asked a good question about that in relation to the idea of an audit. And I thought Nick provided a good, clear answer on what this would provide that an audit would not, given especially that we already are doing audits. So it's actionable sort of suggestions that sort of are focused on how we're moving forward. So for anybody who's interested in like the nuances of what this consultant might offer beyond what an audit would offer, I thought he kind of explained that in a helpful way.
And then the other practice, proposed kind of practice to implement for next year, coming from the town administrator, was this idea, and this is something that John has mentioned before, and I think we've talked about here, is kind of establishing a joint townwide finance committee with current proposal is like 2 members of the school committee, 2 members of the select board, and 2 members of the warrant committee. So, you know, we used to have that kind of joint conversation between select board and school committee. The idea is essentially to bring in warrant committee within those conversations, which I think personally is like great. And so the idea is kind of reestablish that internal communication next year, and have monthly check-ins and budget reports and things like that to create the kind of opportunities for conversation and analysis and discussion around the town's financial situation.
Then I'll be meeting with Nick to make sure those are moving forward.
Are there any questions about the select board presentation or either of those 2 updates?
Could I just add something?
But
So it's not necessarily about that, but I think one of the things that we've talked about is having sort of a governance meeting or a governance conversation around how we, as a school committee, move forward and you know, talk at what point is there a place earlier along the process that maybe we are involved, not necessarily weighing in, but we're hearing the conversations, or is there a way that we're changing it up to a degree that we are involved sooner and maybe coming down? Do you know what I mean? Like, are we changing our practices so that there is more involvement or sort of a greater view into the process earlier? That we've talked about from a government. We haven't talked about it yet, but bringing that up as a way moving forward in the coming years for how the school committee and the finance committee works.
Thanks, Amanda. That's on me. I need to follow up on this scheduling for that, but I will do that. So
we've had a lot. I just wanted to get that to get lost.
Thank you.
Anna?
Just for clarity, I know we had requested $1 million and they're giving us 700 now based on last night's meeting. I was just curious if we could kind of just do a quick recap of what that means for closing out FY25 for us, just so that we're all on the same page. We appreciate it. I don't know if you're able to pull up the slides from last week just to kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Presentation. Can you see that? Okay, so essentially this is the number they were looking at. Obviously, we know starting deficit, where we are with things we feel already feel good about is the 883. Said the additional things that we can implement getting us to the 683. So if all of these things happen, and all of them happen in terms of the cost savings to the level that we're discussing or projecting. And another big one is if we get the state funding, which we anticipate, but we do not know exactly when and exactly how much. These are the somewhat unknowns. Then that our projected deficit is under the 700,000, and the 700,000 should cover it. I'm sure, I mean, Katie and Peter are going to continue to look for ways to shrink this further, control costs further, get this down. We obviously know there are also some unexpected costs that will pop up, are now becoming anticipated in terms of some mandated services that will need to be provided that could push this up slightly. So that's obviously why we suggested the full million, to provide the greatest possible flexibility for the town to cover the and anticipated deficit where we're not 100% sure what the number is.
Mhm.
If the number is less than 700,000, then there's no additional steps needed other than the town meeting has to approve that allocation request. And again, we still need to go to warrant committee to get approval. If they essentially left the door open and say, let's look at it in 30 days, we do have a special town meeting coming up in June. And so if an additional allocation beyond the 700,000 is necessary, we could come back again with some more. That means we essentially have to go through the whole process we're going through now a second time to increase that allocation. My concern that I tried to get across last night, but maybe didn't do it well enough, was if that number is $710,000, like that's not a big difference, but that's still $10,000 that we don't have funding for. And right now I know the town's budget is also tight. So not sure how that would change, even if we're just slightly over the 700,000 number. So.
Right. So do we have any clarity on the water bill? I know we had talked about it last week. So just asking, since it says next week, so that would put us this week.
You're shaking your head.
No, so I haven't received an update, but I'll this morning.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So if, for instance, just so I understand, if we end up going over the 700, we would go back for a June town meeting and ask for more money to close the gap, right?
Yeah, we'd have to go back to select board to ask for them to create a warrant that would, again, essentially pull that. Just don't know. Thing I'm not sure about is if town meeting already votes to establish the $300,000 for the special ed reserve account, allocates that $300,000 to the special ed reserve account. Then we can, through the following town meeting, remove that money from the special ed reserve account, push forward, or if we're just delaying, going to recommend that the town delay the implementation of the special ed reserve account. So I think there's some follow-up with the town administrator to really understand what the decision last night fully means in terms of our exact timelines for when we would need to come back. Right? We obviously have some more time to refine this number, dating the team over the next month, and see where this is kind of projecting. At that point, that will have a little more certainty. It won't be fully, but there are, I think, Anna's points you're making still like other implications for how we make sure that the town is setting itself up to have access to these funds within FY25 if the number is not able to be kind of kept under the 700,000 allocation.
Right. Okay. So I mean, obviously there are options. It's not like, they're giving us 700 and that's it. Like, and we can't close the deficit and we're just, it is what it is. We just couldn't balance our books this year. So that's good that there are options if we needed to. And also if there are increased costs in special ed between now and then, that we can go back. And so that's good. That's good to know. I mean, I guess they're going to do what makes sense for them financially. And it's good that they're offering to give us the 700. I think, just going forward, we just have to be really mindful about addressing some of these early on so that we're not in this situation come next year. So I'm glad that we're looking at, a consultant and so on and so forth, because I definitely think we can, just step back and kind of look at our practices and what, and just get into the discipline of trying to, live within our means. Unfortunately, I just think that's going to have to be the practice going forward. So appreciate it. Thank you.
So Katie, I'm sorry, I should, when did the letter, the books close out for 25? In July?
In July.
So if the state doesn't make that decision until June? Like if they make the decision in June, then we would, like, does the funding come right away? Like, how does that work?
It depends on when the decision is made and when they decide to appropriate the funds. So there is.
Is their fiscal different? Like, is their fiscal year?
No,
Okay.
it's the same fiscal year, but
Okay.
it's, the recommendation was a part of the fiscal year 25, so the current fiscal year supplemental, but it's a part of the fiscal year 26. So the funds that will be appropriated as of July 1st, budget. And so it's following that fiscal year 26 budget process.
Yeah.
Where it's typically not finalized until June or in some instances into July. So that's where I haven't received very clear direction, communication, information on the timing. So I'm a little hesitant right now to say that we'll receive those funds.
Right, that's all I was just trying to figure out is that, what is, because that's a big chunk of the number, right?
It
That's,
is.
and so recognizing that, I guess I'm trying to figure out, and maybe this is sort of what Anna was getting to as well, like what's the process? So if we don't know until, like if we need to close out, but we don't know until late June, like what? That's
What do we do?
what do we do? And and is that
I think that's why we were asking
right?
for the million in order to be able to leave it untouched,
Right.
But
But then is that?
We
then
do need
just
to get clarity though on what the mechanism is.
Okay, and so that's,
Yeah,
regardless of the number,
if
if
it
it's
comes
10 or
in-
400.
if it comes in after the June special town meeting, which it definitely might, then, and that's completely out of our control.
Yeah, okay. I just
So,
wanted to.
yeah, I think
There are a lot of things up in the
I think we're meeting again Monday morning too. Didn't we say that? Thanks.
so,
So,
I think,
at 11:30, yeah.
I think that, Nick explained that last night, like it was sort of interesting because Richard a couple of times said he'd like to follow the advice of Nick, and then Nick did explain this streamlined process, but I think I understand also where they were coming from and preferring to just do this. So I think there are different ways to look at it. I think if we can get that clarity, just so that the select board does understand like what possibly would need to get done in that event. And I think we are talking about that 480 is like the huge unknown variable for us, which would make the difference. So I think it's important to.
Did you understand too that there was kind of a limbo because of the state having to approve free cash? Remember when he mentioned that? Did that have some impact? Because there would be a limbo starting July 1st to whenever
So that's
We wouldn't be able to use it.
right. I mean, the only limbo is that if we take out $1 million and we only use 700,000, then that additional 300,000 that was allocated to the reserve account would at that point not be used and it would become free cash.
For next
The
year.
town can't touch it between that July 1st and whenever it's certified in October, November. So at that point, the town has the money, but they can't allocate it to anything. There's no special town meeting anyways that would allocate funding at that point in time. So I mean, I guess technically you're losing whatever. Assume you can still get interest on it because the cash is still sitting
It's
there.
just-
So I don't think it's just a matter of it can't be like put into a special reserve account or put towards other capital needs or whatever else the town decides to put it until fall town meeting. Which to me isn't a big. I don't see the big operational challenge with that. That's pretty typical.
Okay.
Stuff we finished up.
In the meantime, I feel like what this, requires of us is what we had already all committed to anyway, which is a very tight ongoing monitoring of this. Of the costs. So we'll just need to be staying very up to date as costs come in. And that's that's what's in our control. So,
Other questions? Yes, Selena.
Yeah, so with this new, sort of with the conversation yesterday with the select board, that means that we don't have to go into the FY26 non-override budget and make additional cuts, correct?
That is not clear. So I
Okay.
appreciate the question. So they began talking last night about where those cuts, if necessary, would come from. And they pointed to the OPEB fund, which is a long-term liability from the town. If that's something they would reduce allocation for within FY26 in a non-override scenario. But they didn't commit to anything. So it is possible that the school budget will need to be further reduced in FY26. It's not clear though, if so, if it would be for the full amount we'd withdraw, or for a lesser amount or for no amount. So that's still work that guidance we need from the town administrator and the select board. I'll provide that for Peter to talk with the team about, like on the school side.
Okay, but no immediate actions right now on our part. We're waiting for guidance.
Yeah, I think so.
We want clarity this week, I think, just because I have been talking with principals about the need to potentially go back and look at the budget, and especially because April 29th is so close. I don't think this is something that we want to kind of wait and see a week or 2 weeks down the road. And then because going back into, I mean, we've already reduced so many positions on this non-override list. It's just hugely impactful to go back and dig even deeper when it's already such a devastating reduction. So that's kind of in my mind in terms of clarity as soon as possible. And I have expressed to Nick just kind of what the current non-override reductions do to our services, to our students. I know there's a lot of work happening in the community around this too, to help people understand impacts. They are real and significant, and we're also in a tough financial situation. So anyway, that's kind of, I'm hoping we can get clarity this week in terms of how we move forward from here to April 29th.
Other questions? All right.
Sorry, Mark, I just had a question. That cut list that was shared with us, is that kind of still where we are for right now until we get further guidance?
The non-override list?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we haven't really been able to like shuffle people around or whatever into other positions, anything like that. So it's staying as is. Well,
that cut list is based upon the original cut amount. So it's just a matter of right now, I think what Peter's saying is we don't have perfect clarity on what the extra amount, if any, to the cut list would, or to the school cut for FY26 in a non-override scenario would be. And so that is the additional clarity that is necessary quickly. I mean, all of this is just so late. It's just so late. And so again, I know there's so much complexity with having the two different budgets and the fault of ours, and that, with the impacts of the FY25, that's not the town's fault. And all those things just adds to complexity. But yeah, figuring out what is the amount we would need to reduce, right? Is that something that would be split, taking a little bit from OPEB investment and some from the schools, all from the schools, all from OPEB, or some different proportion? All of those obviously affect what the cuts look like in the staff. I guess as a committee, we could direct the superintendent and the team to figure out what the full $1 million worth of cuts would be and have that as a place to kind of then pull back. It's just a matter of the same issue we had previously where they'd have that list. They wouldn't really want to talk about that in a public meeting about
Right.
people's
I understand. Yeah.
about talking to those people, but then we don't want to talk to those people if that's not actually, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think having some of that internal conversation, at least given the timeline is gonna be so tight. To say, okay, $1 million scenario cut B, because that seems like that'd be the worst case situation here, then that at least gives you a groundwork to then come back to us to say. Okay, now it's actually only 500,000, because we're gonna split it, let's pull back, I think that gives you at least a.
And when will we get, sorry, it's a little hard to hear.
Sorry.
Mark, I can hear you because you're up front. Just when would we have clarity on that? Just in like the next couple of days?
On the number, I think that's what Peter's saying. He's gonna reach out to Nick, try and reach out to Nick today. I think ultimately will require maybe a select board vote if they're meeting on Monday. I think, or if not a vote, at least some kind of consensus on direction of how the town administrator should move forward. So hopefully Peter can get some sense of that today from Nick. If not, hopefully we can push to get that consensus direction from the select board on Monday so that we know how to go forward.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We're at 8:30, so I would like to move us to the public presentation unless there's anything else. So we have a kind of initial draft of the public presentation tonight. Appreciate Katie's work on this. I'll just leave it a non-presenter mode so we can kind of walk through the screen share. A copy of this, Selena and Anna, are also in the finance folder for today. Y'all want to look at it?
And I'll be quicker. I was thinking about the presentation, and maybe this will be covered if Danielle comes to one of our school committee meetings. Would it be beneficial at any point for a select board to have a better understanding of special education budgeting costs, like the way that sort of rolling, the fact that like what you budget for at the beginning of the year is really like you can budget for it, you know how many kids are in there, but recognizing that it's a very fluid process throughout the year, that with people coming in, kids referred for services, recognizing that typically, right about now is when we see a lot of referrals, which you can't account for. I think that points to the need for that special education, that stabilization plan, but I don't know if, and maybe it's just referring them to when Danielle comes in to speak. And I'm saying this all not as an excuse or anything, but I do think that this is an area where everybody, every school, every district, everybody is continually impacted to no fault of anyone's. It's just such a fluid process, and there's so many legal mandates around it that I think it would just be helpful to even understand us saying that, like that you have to provide these services. These are required services, required people. It's a required process. So I just don't know if there is, if you're in it, you get it. But if you're not, you hear this terminology and you hear like, mandated this, I just don't know if that piece of it would be helpful at some point. And maybe that's something, John, you could bring back or to understand really the process around that, because it is such a big budget number, but it is also very, it's the one that is most volatile. And I think we hear a lot and we kind of present things as if there's knowledge around it when maybe there isn't. And it just gives, I think then when there are discussions about budget impacts, there's an understanding process. So I don't know, just might be something to think about moving forward, or for John, for you to consider for the select board and see if that's helpful. Similarly, maybe with the warrant committee, but I don't know, I just know it's a big number, so just food for thought.
There's also, I don't know if this is material for it, but the town has set up a site for frequently asked questions for the override. Is that a spot for it? Or is that too
I think it's
specific?
too, I think it's too specific,
Specific
it's
to
kind of
that.
in the weeds, and we had Danielle present the other day, and I know maybe there's a presentation around it, and I just think it's very nuanced, but it's also very sensitive, and I don't know, just an understanding of it, not deep in the weeds, but like a top level, this is why it's fluid and this is sort of what happens. I don't know, it just might be useful.
And that's why I was asking Katie what percentage of the budget was special ed, so we could say X amount of budget is unpredictable, volatile.
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
the word is.
Yeah.
All right, the presentation, I think a lot of this is pulled from prior presentations, other community select board presentations, presentations to us. So this is kind of the planned agenda here. So starting first with kind of who we are and what we value in terms of our mission statement. Focus as we think about our budget and what we focus on. Bringing that for whoever attends. This is the budget history kind of slides from the select board meeting yesterday. Similar slide to what we presented yesterday. I'm just defining what the structural deficit is, given that's kind of language we have been using. Hopefully, people are familiar with, but continue to restate that. An overview, high level, kind of what the FY26 budget is. So clarifying that it's the 5.7, not the 6.4. There will be a slight cut to programming. I think that's something we need to make clear for the community because this is a funding less than level service. Verifying that the schools are the only department that is seeing a cut to level service, and then discussion of kind of a reallocation of some resources to identify critical investments. This group has talked about. Trying to kind of cover the highlights of the FY26 pieces in that slide. More information just on like what a level service budget is and what are the drivers of kind of budget changes year over year. It's kind of a similar slide y'all have seen before. Katie has updated it to reflect the $5.7 million increase instead of the 6.4. So updated lines and things like that to show kind of how this builds. You can see the increase. The school budget is the 8.4 instead of the 9.44. Some framing around Prop 2.5. This came up a little bit even select board yesterday around, hey, what happens if special ed? Aaron asked what happens if special ed goes up 14%. I mean, we can't cover that within our budget, and 2.5%. Special ed's going up 14% unless the town allocates us more than 2.5%. So fiscal reality of kind of Prop 2.5 override process. Sharing in the kind of, so this is all FY26 override scenario west, and then the consequences of the failed override. This is that illustration that's on the town website. And I think to your question again, this is around is the non-override scenario going to change? It could. I don't think we're going to get into that too. We're not going to be able to say anything in terms of exactly what it is. If somebody asks like, hey, is the current deficit potentially going to impact the non-override? The answer would be like, it could. We just don't have clarity on that. So it's not something we at this point could probably dive into. So this is just talking about like other information around resources, future meetings we want to add in here. I think there was a discussion of even trying to walk through folks on the NPS website,
Mhm.
show the resources that are there, open up a few, show the positions added link. I know that's just one that keeps coming up, pull up the full budget, right? That's there. Recordings, just kind of walk through. So there's a question of if we wanted to share the override
We got-
campaigns
We
website.
got clarity, we're allowed to do that. It's
Yeah.
factual information that we're able to share.
I think also potentially adding here didn't actually know that the town was starting to put together like a website with some resources too, so potentially also linking that. Just provide folks information on, obviously, we're sharing about the school side of this, but the others, Milton United and the town's website would have the other departments' information.
Right. And the tools as well, calculators.
That's in there too.
And I haven't been on it in a bit, do they have kind of the tools for what the cost would be annually and for like, let's say like the next 5 years, how much that would go up? Because I think that's important to kind of put out there versus like, like monthly. I know they'd initially shared a monthly one, but I just want to make sure that they're also including just being in the spirit of being transparent, what the cost is, so that people know, because, if we're, especially when we're in a situation where we would potentially have to go ask for another override in a couple of years or new school and so on and so forth, just to kind of build that trust, I think would be important. So just, and I can, I don't know if anyone's in touch with the Milton United team to share that. And then the other thing I wanted to also ask is I know, the NEC program, there's been questions about it, and what that potentially means and concerns. So I don't know if there's just, clarity slide that needs, I don't even know if it needs to be a slide itself, but just to kind of add what that means. So there's some clarity around that and that it's not cutting programs and, just thinking of that.
Yeah, I think having a slide on with that more detail of what the FY 26 cuts are, it's like you essentially presented this questions today. That show what the cuts are and the reallocations are within the override budget. Now that shows the neck cut, and I think then from there, information can be shared or discussed
I
around.
think just for clarity, so people don't feel like that, program is being taken away completely and just, so.
Yeah, I think even maybe having a slide specifically on that, even we've gotten some questions on it. That's something Danielle.
Yeah, we're meeting today, so.
Okay, yeah, just a quick overview. We do have these are, again, kind of full presentations, I think, from the whole select board presentation, just put in some things in the appendix that we can pull up if there are questions on it, but not try and overwhelm. So that's what we have thus far. We don't have a lot of information on, again, kind of the FY 25, the stuff we went through with the select board last night. We have it here within the appendix if we need to. It's like walking through examples of the structural deficit that we went through, budget recap, and things we looked at and things we implemented in order to kind of get down. I think the focus of the community presentation is mostly on FY 26, but obviously if folks have those questions, that information is there that we can reference. I don't know if we need to put it within the primary presentation.
I would say not.
I don't
Yeah.
think so.
Have it if ask about it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, just in terms of messaging. I think otherwise the content that we're trying to deliver gets to be too much. And I think for for the focus to be on FY26. And obviously, if questions come up, then I'm glad to see that there's material in the appendix that we can refer back to if folks want to do that. But it's only an hour meeting, so there's only so much time to go through things. The other question that I've been hearing is around the ELA curriculum, and I know that there is some shared dissatisfaction with the middle school ELA curriculum. And so, and it could be probably the way that it's being used, not necessarily the curriculum itself. So that's a bigger question, but really just sort of speaking to, I think, the timeline as well, just briefly around what, we discussed at the last school committee meeting, that really we're talking about a process, and that folks will not necessarily should expect that FY26 will automatically be a full-fledged new curriculum because we have to walk through a process.
Anna?
I think just so I have clarity, a couple of things. The large group sub coverage, which I've been very vocal about being against, is that something that we plan on bringing, like not implementing come September when we get into FY26 if we have a successful override, or is that something that we're just going to continue to do? Because if it's one thing, if it's, as much as I'm not on board with it, it's one thing to do it short term between now and the end of the school year, but if that's something that practice that we're going to continue into next year, then I definitely want that to be looked at. So I just wanted some clarity around that. And then
to just answer that one real quick, there's no plans to continue that in an override or a non-override scenario in FY26, because in either of those scenarios, the budget is being built to be sustainable within whatever level of service those things are. So the sub budget is being increased in order to cover our cost of subs within FY26, again, within both override and non-override scenarios. So yeah, the answer is no, there's no plans to implement that next year. That's I know you were having trouble hearing Peter down the table. He was saying that.
I appreciate that. Yes, it's harder to read back and hear from when Peter and Katie are in the back of the room. The other question, and just
talk louder.
What?
I can talk louder.
Great, I would appreciate that.
Okay.
The other question I had was, in terms of the reductions that we talked about, we had the reductions to include the ELA curriculum and the extra ELL support staff, but and then obviously the 700K that we talked about in reductions. But just to clarify, there's no positions that are other than the vacant ones. We're not looking at anything like that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
To Selena's point about the middle school curriculum, I think it's helpful and important for us to highlight the benefit to the schools of that curriculum being built into our operating budget, because that is the kind of a thing where, additional concerns that exist in the community about curriculum beyond the K-5 ELA curriculum, unless we get this budget with that allocation, we remain unable to sort of be strategic in addressing those ongoing questions and concerns. So I think the community, I believe there should be support for that as the ELA curriculum, which is our urgent need. But in addition to that, it is, and I think last night the question was posed, where's the sustainability? And that's a key sort of change that we have implemented in that budget for sustainability in terms of the schools of being able to do our job without having to always go ask the town for free cash every time there's a need for curriculum. And I think the way we've been relying upon that is what has deterred us from being proactive in addressing the needs that we know exist. So it has led us to a situation where we only seek a new curriculum when we're like years overdue for it, basically, and that we know that's a negative impact on kids and families. So I think to the people with questions about the middle school curriculum, it's like, you know, we're actually setting ourselves up to be much better positioned to actually address some of those concerns and questions with that built into our operating budget. So I really hope that families will be able to focus on that as they're, you know, becoming informed voters around the override. It's just going to help us like going forward in a lot of different ways, not just this immediate literacy curriculum way.
Yeah, can I add on to that? Because I think that is one of the things that's surprising that we don't do. Recognizing that I recognize so much of our budget is staff, but we are schools. And so it is teaching, it is, you know, there's nothing that remains static. Right, so how, you know, I think it would be, I think it doesn't make sense looking across whether whatever curriculum it is, or we're talking about like changes to even like for the special education programming, having things in there because we know things change, new information comes along. So to just have it be thought of as a one-time thing every X number of years, I just don't think does make sense. Nothing is that static. And so especially when we're talking about curriculum and learning for our kids, it just to not have it be part of a budget on an ongoing basis just doesn't really make sense.
But I think what you were saying before is really true. I think what you were saying before is really true, that the importance of communication, and as the town is going through this whole process of kind of unifying around budget and bringing a consultant in, I think there's a lot of opportunity next year for communicating out and engaging in some of the subtleties that you're talking about that in a regular budget presentation year after year after year, people just don't get. So it does take a different kind of approach to help people understand at the level you're talking about, which is, you know, the people in this room get it because they're in the budget, but it is challenging. It's complex and challenging. And so just thinking about how to like chunk it out and frame it so that people can understand just beyond an emotional response to a number is, I think, important work. And I think it's an opportunity next year.
Another important thing to maybe not grasp in this room because it's so basic is explaining to people what curriculum is. You know what I mean? What that change means.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the average Joe.
Or John.
No, I have a teacher as well.
Yeah.
Hannah?
I get it.
Yeah, and I think definitely having those funds allocated towards curriculum and making sure they stay there, I think also gives us an opportunity to really look at, you know, the middle school. I know that's been a concern for years. And, you know, although I've definitely seen improvements, I would say we still have a long way to go. I think the teachers do a phenomenal job, but I really do think, you know, in terms of, you know, offering supports and challenging students, I think we can definitely make a lot of improvements there. So I really hope that that's something that we can also prioritize next year, is to really look at that middle school and see how we can really improve perception there. I think we still have quite long way to go. But I do really, really appreciate the work that the teachers are doing. So I think as a committee to offer the support there, I think would go a long way.
Other information I feel like we have not captured within this presentation that we think is going to be vital to include. Or other information that y'all would want us to make sure we have within some appendix that we can reference in case questions about it come up.
Do we talk about, I think it would be helpful. I'm just going back through again. I think it's on slide 4. So do we think it would be helpful to talk about what we discussed today, what was discussed in the select board meeting about this idea of moving forward? Like this accountability, this, kind of combined town, warrant committee, school process, and that consultant piece, just because I think if it's sort of like, this is about next year, but recognizing that we have things in place to ensure that, through this, this override, it's ideally lasting, what was it, until 20, yeah, 5 years. So what are the things that we're putting in place, the structures that we're putting in place? Like, it doesn't have to go a deep dive, but even the things that we talked about that, for moving forward, and that position us to not have a discussion about this next year or in 2 years. And to that point, sort of more of a unified approach across town and school. So that just might be just a couple of bullet points about the things that came up last night.
Yes, so these are the slides we presented last night, and these are the ones from the school alone side.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Do you maybe add in that bullet about?
and then this is, the
Yes.
consultant, which I think we could add another bullet here about plans, joints, townwide finance.
Yeah.
Committee, and call this something like, school/town joint practices. We could pull that up into the main presentation. That makes sense for folks.
And then one other thing, we've talked about certain areas where there's been more fluidity, but I know when we've talked about things that it's like, I don't know if it's even it's like we do not intend moving forward to be going back to the town at the end of the year to be asking to help balance the budget. Like this process, this budget, the way that it's built for 26 and moving forward, we have now put things in place. We are approaching it, whether or not it's been done in the past, but we are approaching it with the idea that every year this budget, it will be a balanced budget. Like these processes, this starting with 26, this has been built to, we addressed it in that structural deficit piece, but I just think it's sort of like that is the key piece. Like it's not that idea that historically we've had to. It's like we are building, this budget is built and budgets will be built moving forward to be balanced at the end of the year. And if we are seeing things early, we will have to make adjustments to programs or things along the school year to address it, but that we're doing with that lens. So I don't know if it's a statement. I just think I think that piece just needs to be repeated and repeated so that people have confidence that that's
And then they need to see us do that.
correct.
That's coming year,
Yes.
so that we've said we're gonna do it, and then we're gonna do it, and then we do it,
Right.
and then.
Because for some people, this is the first thing they're seeing. Or the first conversation, right? And I just don't think assuming any, I think for everything that we're going to, and I think I think this is written that way, but I think every conversation is the assumption that this is the first thing they're seeing and hearing, but they might have heard. Do you know what I mean? So just repeating that message.
As far as, so I think this is pretty good for the town, the info session thing, for the warrant committee. I think we need to provide more detail on the budget proposal itself.
Mhm.
So. And I know that we're gonna keep working on that after this meeting wraps up, but, does anyone have thoughts on additional ideas about the warrant committee part? Because that's also.
I think that what we just talked about would be important. Because I think it will be a 25, 26. I think there would be questions on that. What does the impact of the overages for 25 mean for 26?
We're not gonna probably know that by tonight.
No, but what I mean is, like, right now, just what we know right now, but that's why, that's where that reduction came, and I think that would be important.
Even talking about the changes that were made in the budget, reading 26
Yes.
in the fall.
Yeah, I think that, like, there's a part of me that feels like that continues to get lost.
Mhm.
That is not recognizing that is restating that this budget is built looking at the projected overages from this year. Like, this budget it has taken into account where we are today. And I just think
That is why the level service increase is higher
correct.
than other town departments, is because our budget has been built differently than it was in the past. Which are not true in the same way.
Right, which then carries us forward
Yes.
for the override to that, for that 5 years. So I think there's somehow a disconnect there still. So I think that piece is important to address and look, and I think it is probably those three numbers, more than that, but like, I think those 3 big buckets for the ones. So I think that piece would be important.
Anna?
Just had one question. I know we've definitely hired for quite a bit of positions since, since COVID and shortly before. I know that we're, as you write here, that, we're going to try our best to operate within a budget. Like, how would we, like, in terms of like hiring practices, like, what are we looking at to kind of change, especially when some of those are mandated or things that we would like to, like, hey, we need to hire in this department more to make that department function better, and so on and so forth. Like, how are we going to kind of balance that?
I mean, I think it's one, it's having a clear enough understanding of how much we're typically spending, and that's kind of what the work that's happened this year in every line item. So when you look through the update from a couple weeks ago, where Katie highlighted all the different structural deficits with a kind of like a colored to show like what we're budgeting for 26, what we had budgeted for 24 and 25, and what we were actually spending. So part of it is just the right sizing of FY26 will address a lot of that. The other part, in terms of hiring positions that are not within the budget, is something that, if, for example, we were talking about, required services, or a student comes in and needs a nurse, for example, we can't predict that, right? And that we may need to provide that based on an IEP. So those kinds of things are going to continue to happen every year, where either a in-house staffing position needs to be hired, or contracted service is contracted to provide services that are required. But outside of that, the practice needs to be and will be, and I'm not going to be here to steward that, but I know based on the work that Katie's done and the whole leadership team is doing is not adding any positions that are not in the budget. Again, unless there's a requirement for those positions that there's no other way to fill them. Part of what we also have to, one of the challenges is if we are adding those required positions mid-year, they have not been budgeted, we need to look at other parts of our budget to balance the addition of those positions. And some of that that's the whole rationale behind having a circuit breaker reserve to be able to respond to some of those, an influx of needing that additional spending. But it also does put pressure on the general fund and positions not within special education to respond to that. And we are also, I think this year has been a lot of reshuffling as we've tried to live within our means, when I think probably historically we would have added some positions. We haven't been. We've been restructuring and moving staffing around where we can. So I think that practice will continue. I will say, like, there's a lot of strain right now, just given where we are financially and kind of where we are with staffing. And we are having conversations, kind of weekly with issues that are coming up, and we're having to problem solve and be very creative right now. It is putting strain on our system.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that response. I just want to make sure that we're not, when we have to make those adjustments and hire in certain areas, we're not looking to cut from general ed, because again, anything that would negatively impact, student experience, as we say here, I just would be not in favor of. So I know none of us are, but I just want to make sure that when we're looking at, areas where we can reduce in order to add in other areas that are mandated, I just hope that it's not from, general ed, because I don't think that's a way to continue to get support for the schools. So.
Want to be mindful of the time at 9:08. These are a lot of good ideas in terms of additional things to highlight within the presentation. Anything else that's burning? Obviously, we're not able to jointly work on these slides outside of a public meeting. But if you individually are looking at the slides at some point today and want to suggest another slide and email that over to Katie and Lizzie, by all means, please do. Or if you look at a slide and think some wording could be slightly improved, you can try and leave a comment or shoot, again, Katie or Lizzie an email with that as we work to just try and refine it before 6 o'clock. And for anybody watching, a reminder, it's 6 to 7 p.m. tonight at the Pierce Library, second floor.
Followed immediately by the warrant committee.
Yes, we will have to be running out of there to get over the warrant today.
And so I think we have all the invites, I believe now, and so just in thinking about the school committee members, we do not have a warrant committee invite for tonight, but that is happening and that is been posted, so school committee members can come. I think. Because I think it says, I think it's posted, school committee members can join the warrant committee meeting.
Yeah, don't we like typically double post or do we?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it did.
double
It's,
post.
that's,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And it's on the calendar, on the town calendar.
Right, so that, I'm just reminding school committee members here listening, if you're available, please come. And then for the future budget information sessions, you can just reply to the calendar invite to indicate if you're planning to join that one or not. So, thank you. It's a lot of meetings right now, I know that.
Jay, is it?
So,
Great. If that is all, then yeah, totally understand, Anna. Appreciate you. So, all right, that is all. We will move on. Selena, Amanda, we don't have minutes to vote on. I'll finish up the meeting minutes from this week and send that over to you for vote next Monday. Next meetings, we do have one next Monday, the 31st, and next Wednesday, the 2nd. And then we are off the following Monday. Selena's unable to make that the 7th, so we're just skipping the 7th, and we have one on the 9th. We did say if, there's something comes up on the 2nd where we feel like we need that second meeting in 2 weeks, we can talk about that next week at that time. Those are our next 2 meetings. We have obviously school committee next Wednesday. Also just in terms of next Monday, we were gonna try and talk about the fees today. We realized we weren't gonna have the time given the select board conversation and the slides, so we are gonna have that on Monday. Is that right, Katie? Okay, so Monday will be a discussion of the FY26 fees, given that some of that does impact kind of what the projections are. We can talk that through. We want to get that out in front of folks within the community as soon as possible so they can plan. And then we can obviously also on Monday debrief a bit of the community forum and the warrant committee, the information coming out of both those, and plan accordingly. When is our next presentation after tonight? Community presentation?
It's next week.
Is it next Wednesday or Tuesday?
it's the 1st, we have the morning and the evening.
Okay, so we should definitely debrief the community presentation on the 31st.
Yep.
In order to, if there's stuff we want to add or change.
Yep.
Okay, so those would be the 2 priorities, the debriefing, the community presentation. Yeah. And the fee schedule. Anything else? Not, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor, Selena?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
Amanda, yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.